My name's Angelo, and welcome to We Want Picks. I'm going to break down this entire UFC 275 fight card. I'm going to give you my picks and our DraftKings plays. We're going to talk about player value, who should be in your lineup, and who you should avoid putting in your lineup. But before I jump in, we already broke this card down on Monday. Not much has changed since then, so a lot of this analysis is going to stay the same, but let me cover what has changed first. Weigh-ins are over. For the most part, weigh-ins went really well. Let's talk about three things. One, you can see here the Manel Kape-Rogerio Bontorin fight. That is canceled. That is no longer on the card, so if one of them is in your lineup, you got to take him out, which sucks because I know Manel Kape, a lot of people were high on him, but Rogerio Bontorin was taken to the hospital, so that fight is done. It's canceled. No replacement. Both of those guys are off the card. That's a very objective thing that happened. Two subjective things. For the most part, everybody looked good. Glover Teixeira, full disclosure, friend of mine in real life. I've known him personally for a very long time, so I'm pretty high on him on these breakdowns all week. He looked a little rough at weigh-ins. He was very open and honest during the post-weigh-in show, saying it's rough. I've been on weight for a very long time. I'm not feeling great right now. Granted, they're about more than 24 hours out from having the fight, so he's got plenty of time to recover. I don't think it's an issue personally, but some of you already think he's a little older, and then that might tip your scales. Personally, it doesn't affect me or my pick or putting him in my lineup whatsoever. And the third thing is Chefchako. She looked great, no issues. But in the post-weigh-in show, she's already talking about her next fight. I want Nunes. I want Pena. She's not talking about Taila Santos at all. That may matter, that may not, but hopefully she's not looking past Taila Santos, because Taila Santos is pretty dangerous, even though Valentina Chefchako is probably the female GOAT at this point. Let me add a quick fourth. I said three things. Let me add a quick fourth thing. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Weili Zhang, that's a rematch. We've seen them weigh in. We've seen them fight. We've seen all of it before. But Weili looked way smaller than Joanna for whatever reason. I know we've seen these weigh-ins before, and these are grown women. They didn't get any taller or shorter in the last 2 years. But Joanna looked really tall, really long, and it just, for some reason, that stood out at me way more this time than last time. Again, it's not going to affect my breakdown. It's not going to affect my pick, but I thought you should be aware. Let's jump right in. And we're just going to do this card bottom to top. So let's start with the very first fight of the night. And right out of the gate, we've got a competitive fight, and I like the underdog here. We've got Jocelyn Edwards. She's taking on Ramona Pascal. This is an interesting, kickboxer versus kickboxer matchup. So Jocelyn Edwards is a good kickboxer. She uses range really well, and she mixes up her strikes. Super tall for the division. She's fighting Ramona Pascal. Ramona Pascal made her UFC debut on short notice against Jocelyn Nunes. Jocelyn Nunes is an absolute savage killer that couldn't get it done. She could not put Ramona Pascal away, even though the whole world thought she would. And it's an interesting matchup because Ramona Pascal is a traditional Muay Thai fighter. Lived in Thailand, all the things, Muay Thai fighter. But look at this, 3 takedowns. She survived an early almost murdering to come back, get those takedowns, racked up almost 5 minutes of control time, and she scored 46 points in a loss, and the first round is basically out the window. So she scored 46 points essentially in 2 rounds without a win bonus. That was great for her, $7,300. I think she wins this fight again because the reality is she survived Jocelyn Nunes, who's deadly with her hands. Jocelyn Edwards doesn't have anywhere near the same power. Jocelyn Edwards gets taken down, no problem. She only has a 47% takedown defense. I think Ramona Pascal gets this done. $7,500. You need some underdogs in your lineup. I think she's solid value. Look what she did in a loss. 46 in a loss. And obviously we're trying to get all winners here, but I think there's value here. $7,500. I think Ramona Pascal gets it done. Then we've got another competitive female fight. We've got Sylvana Gomez Juarez, and she's taking on Na Liang or Liang Na. Sylvana Gomez Juarez is a striker, a dominant striker. She has legit power, but you see both these losses here by submission. She doesn't have much of a ground game at all. This loss here, so Godinez took her down, 4 or 5 times, something absurd. I think it was 5 times. Godinez came in here, bullied her, took her down. Yeah, it was 5 times, and she did that in 4 minutes. Okay, so it was a first-round submission loss, and she was taken down 5 times, all right? But this one here, the Demopoulos loss, She dropped her with an insane, just blasted her in the face. Demopolis dropped. Juarez followed her to the ground, and then that's where she got in a scramble and lost by submission. My point is, she's got very real power in her hands. And she's fighting Na Liang or Liang Na, who lost to Carnelozzi, but she had 3 takedowns, tons of control time. And what ended up happening is she lost a scramble. So then she was on her back and she just got beat on. And we all know Carnelozzi's tough and jacked and strong and all the things. My point here is, again, I like the underdog here. Liang Na got 3 takedowns in 2 rounds, racked up almost 4 minutes of control time, and that's what she does. Dominant wrestler. Just takedown, 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 takedown. Gomez Juarez, nasty hands, not the best takedown defense, and not much to offer on the ground. I like Liang Na here. I like her here as well, so I'm going back-to-back underdog women. Again, if you need room in your lineup, you need a couple of underdogs, both Liang Na and Ramona Pascal, I think they'll get takedowns, they'll get control time, and I think they'll score really, really well. And look at this, 41 points, and this is in 2 rounds. So these women scored really well in their last losses. Add a win bonus on top of that, all of a sudden she scored 41 points. I like both of them to win their fights, wrestlers versus strikers, and I'm going to always favor the wrestlers in those style matchups. Then we've got Kyung Ho Kang taking on Bagarai Dana. Kyung Ho Kang, he's a well-rounded fighter. He uses range really well, but he also works in takedowns. 3 against Liu, 3 against Davis. Took down every single opponent outside of Tanaka, and then his last fight, which is a loss. 5, 3, 2. I mean, he's putting up numbers. And again, solid grappler, and I love the grapplers here, especially for DraftKings. Control time scores points. Look at this. 93 points in this decision because he had 3 takedowns and 12 minutes and 23 seconds of control time, and that was 93 points. That's very, very solid. And he's taking on Dana Bagarai, who's a striker. He comes forward with volume. He's got speed. He's got power. His speed is an unbelievable asset for him because he's touching people up before they even know what's happening. And he's dangerous. He's very, very dangerous. But again, and this is a weird card. I love a lot of underdogs here. This is basically a pick'em, so this isn't a dramatic, wild underdog, I guess, like the last 2 you could argue. But I like Kang to win this fight as well. I think Kang is going to come forward, work the takedowns. He's a very durable guy. And Dana can be, he's like knockout or bust. And in many cases, first round or bust. So I think Kang's durability and his wrestling, and he's got his own striking, I think that's going to frustrate Dana. He's not going to get the first round finish, and then Kang's going to take over from there. So I like Kang to win this fight. I don't think I'm going to put him in my lineup, though. I get it. $7,900 is a little bit of value, but Dana is so dangerous that Kang is – I'm not going to take the chance on him. If you think Dana wins by knockout, I mean, let's look. That's how he wins. 100, 128, 107. So if you're confident with Dana, then he absolutely 100% should be in your lineup. Then we've got another interesting fight. We've got Jake Matthews taking on Andre Fialo. Andre Fialo, I keep calling him the post-COVID Kamzat because he's just quick turnarounds. Look at this. May. Well, let's go. January, April, May. And now he's going to be fighting in June. So quick turnarounds for him. He's fighting every single month within weeks of each other. And he's sort of making a name for himself. He lost his UFC debut against Michel Pereira. Michel Pereira literally doubled his strikes. That was a pretty one-sided loss. Then he knocked out Baeza, knocked out Van Camp. The reality is, though, Andre Fialo, I know he's like everybody's golden boy right now. He gets hit, and he gets hit often. You saw that in the Michel Pereira fight. If you go back to the PFL, he's getting smacked around there, too. He possesses some very real power in his hands, and he's fighting Jake Matthews. And Jake Matthews is a grappler. Jake Matthews, he's coming back after a year layoff, which is always tricky when you see that, but he's a well-rounded guy. He's got really solid wrestling, really good grappling. He works angles well with his striking. He has no problem going to the body than the head, and he averages about 2 takedowns per fight. And let's look at these wins. 87, 96, 55, and their decision wins with 4 takedowns, 1 takedown. Almost, look at the amount of control time here. I do think Fialo wins this fight, and I actually appreciate his price here in DraftKings because $8,500, I thought for sure DraftKings was going to buy into the hype and they're going to put him at 9,000. So I actually think Fialo at $8,500 is probably worth it in your DraftKings lineup. With that being said, I think he's very overrated. I think there's way too much hype here because the only I don't want to say well-rounded, but the only decent fighter he fought, Michel Pereira, dominant, doubled his strikes, absolutely controlled that entire fight, and then he put out a Chinny Baeza and then put out a Chinny Van Camp. So we'll see. Jake Matthews is a very real opponent. It's very possible Jake Matthews works in some wrestling, very possible Jake Matthews works in some grappling, and then just gets that done. But I do think Fialo is going to win this fight, so $8,500, he may be worth that. Then we've got Steve Garcia, and he's taking on Jairzi Maheshete. Steve Garcia, he was a featherweight his entire career. He's come up to lightweight in his, these last 2 UFC fights. He's a solid grappler. He's got good takedowns, decent boxing. He likes to come forward. He's got big strikes. And he's fighting Maheshete. And Maheshete is coming off a Contender Series, so there's not going to be any data here. But he's coming off a solid Contender Series win. The guy's super young. He's only 22 years old. He's got only 7 fights in his entire career, but he has incredible composure. This win-loss record, 12-4, that's solid. That's solid competition. Mahechete's 6-1. Yeah, it's some holes in that competition there. So I do like Steve Garcia to push a pace, come forward, and work it in. He's been very vocal in interviews that he's not going to give Maheshete any space. He's going to pressure him forward and just work from there. He's not going to give him any room to breathe. But Maheshete is used to this underdog role. In that Dana White Contender Series fight, he was a plus 1,000 betting underdog, and he got that done. He was dropped in that fight too, and he still composed himself, still came forward, still won that decision, and is actually the only Chinese fighter ever to win a Dana White Contender Series contract. So I think Steve Garcia gets it done. And again, I think $8,400 is a fair price, and we're really betting on experience versus youth here. So I think Steve Garcia, $8,400, is probably worth that price tag. Then we got Seng Woo Choi taking on Josh Cooleybow, $9,100 for Choi. And I think, when we talk about 9,000s, we're talking about you're going to get a stoppage. You're going to get a stoppage. And it's very possible he gets a stoppage, but it also might look like this Zalal fight where he has to work in takedowns. But I think Choi does win this fight. He's a good, clean striker. He fights tall. He throws with solid power. And he's fighting Josh Cooleybow. And Cooleybow, he's a solid striker. He's aggressive. He's tough. He throws with heat, and he's always live for a knockout. And he's willing to just make a fight ugly and dirty. I like Choi in this fight. I think he can keep it technical. I think he'll avoid the brawl. He probably work in a takedown or two, but I think it's a decision win for Choi. So I like Choi. I think Choi wins this fight for sure. $9,100, we're talking about stoppages here. But I like so many underdogs on this card that, maybe I can afford the $9,100. And, it's such a tricky card. But I do like Choi to win the fight. $9,100 is a lot of money, but we got to see how the lineups work out. Then we got Brendan Allen at $9,000. He's fighting Jacob Malkoun. Brendan Allen is a BJJ black belt, and he's a decent striker. He's got solid low kicks. His takedowns are pretty solid when he uses them. And I say when he uses them because he's turned into a striker. No takedowns against Alvey, none against Curtis, none against Punahil Sorial. And that was a fight he should have done takedowns. He worked in some against Roberson, and then 1, 2, 3 fights before that with no takedowns. He is a grappler. I understand his hands are pretty solid, and it actually looked really good against Punahil Soriano, but he's not a striker. And I'll tell you what, you see this Sam Alvey win submission, and yeah, he dropped Sam Alvey with a punch. He looked like crap. He looked bad leading up to that. Sam Alvey looked like he was going to knock Brendan Allen out. He looked good in that fight. Brendan Allen looked bad. And Brendan Allen's fighting Jacob Malkoun, and Jacob Malkoun is a grappler. He also has enjoyed the striking quite a bit, like Brendan Allen does, but Jacob Malkoun sticks to his grappling, 8 takedowns, 6 takedowns, and that's what you can expect out of him. If Brendan Allen came in here and used all of his tools, he grappled and he striked, he used the striking to set up the wrestling, then I think Brendan Allen's a clean pick. The problem is you can't trust Brendan Allen. You just can't trust him. He's striking when he should grapple. He's grappling when he should strike. Chris Curtis just absolutely knocked him out. He did outstrike Punahil, which was great, but you just don't know what you're going to get. I mentioned he looked awful against Sam Alvey, even though that was a win. I'm going an underdog here. I think Jacob Malkoun can be trusted to do what he's supposed to do. 6 takedowns, 8 takedowns. I think he's just going to come in here and shoot a bunch of takedowns. He is also a BJJ black belt. He's got solid grappling. There's no reason he should be afraid to be on the ground. $7,200, and look at the numbers he's putting up in wins. I think Jacob Malkoun is very, very live here. People love Brendan Allen, and honestly, he's got a decent body of work. Let's look at him again real quick. He's got a decent body of work here, but his only losses to Strickland and to Chris Curtis. But these are striking losses, and we see here he's not using his grappling as much as he should. So I like Malkoun to just stick to a game plan, and sometimes that's all you need. Then we've got Jack Della Madalena taking on Ramazan Emeev. Jack Della Madalena, he is a striker. He's coming off this solid win, but let's be real. Pete Rodriguez had 4 professional fights coming into this? 4? Had no business in the UFC, had no business fighting Jack Della Madalena. The weight class was weird. He was super soft. Nothing about that fight made sense. So Jack obviously won by first round knockout, and that was what he was supposed to do, so good for him. But he is a striker. He's almost like a Sean Strickland, where it's all just light touches, but they somehow have power behind them. He'll come in, touch you a few times, and take big steps backwards to get out of the pocket. And he's fighting Ramazan Emeev. Ramazan Emeev, he's really well-rounded. He's got very solid kickboxing. He's got very solid wrestling. Look, 2 takedowns, 4-0 in that loss. 2, 3, 1. He's working in his takedowns. He's working in his striking, and he is an absolute decision machine on both sides of this. $8,000. This is basically a pick'em. Again, another underdog here, but I think Ramazan Emeev gets this done. If you go back and you watch a lot of Jack Madalena's fights, go look at Glenn Pettigrew when he fought him. He was taken down, and Glenn is not a good wrestler. Glenn was exhausted, could barely move, and he was still able to work in the takedowns and take down Jack Madalena. I think Ramazan Emeev has cardio for days, very solid wrestling. I think he gets it done, and I don't think it's much of a problem. And we have the rematch of the century. We've got Zhang Weili taking on Joanna Jędrzejczyk. If you didn't watch their first fight, it was an absolute drag-em-out war. I mean, look at these numbers. It was 5 full rounds, 165 significant strikes of 170. So only 5 of those strikes were not significant. And it was an absolute war. If you remember, Joanna, let's just remember these numbers. 170, 165. Let's go to Joanna. And I'm showing you this because I think Joanna won that fight if I'm scoring it. And then Weili, 186, 196. She outstruck Weili, outstruck her, outvolumed her. Control time was essentially the same, even though Weili had a takedown. But if you remember, Joanna had a watermelon growing out of the top of her head, and she looked like an alien. And I'm not trying to, the point there is that affected the judges' scoring. I think Joanna won that fight, and if she doesn't have that giant hematoma, she wins that fight, and the judges would have given her that fight. It is a rematch. It is 2 full years later, more than 2 full years later. When Joanna lost that fight, she fired her team. She fired her fitness coaches. She fired half of the people that were, and she blamed it was everybody's fault except hers. Weili lost when she lost to Rose. She shaved her head, got back in camp, put it together, came back, and looked better. She lost the rematch, but she looked good. She worked in takedowns. She really evolved as a fighter. I think Weili wins this rematch. I think it's another war. $8,800, that is tricky. I do wish it was 5 rounds. I know Joanna was asking for 5 rounds, but they did keep it at 3. So, it would be nice if it was 5 rounds, but it is not. I think Weili wins this fight, $8,800. She may be worth that, especially if she works in some takedowns. And then we've got the co-main event. We've got Valentina Chefchako, the women's GOAT, potentially the GOAT across any division, and she's taking on Taila Santos. Taila Santos is very dangerous. She only has 1 finish in the UFC, but she's got 14 finishes in her career. 14 finishes in her career. She's very, very dangerous. Valentina Chefchako, you know how good she is. She's great at everything. If you look at this fight, Lauren Murphy took her down 3 times. Jessica Andrade took her down 7. Jennifer Maia took her down 5. Chikagian 3. She could have outstruck every single one of those women and chose not to. She chose to grapple. It's amazing. She can do whatever the hell she wants to do. She's beaten everybody except Nunes, but she's losing decisions to Nunes. That's how good Valentina Chefchako is. I think Valentina Chefchako gets it done. You probably need her in your lineup. I will say, I think Taila Santos is more dangerous than any of Valentina's other opponents. I really mean that. And I know it's easy to look at Valentina. Oh, it's Valentina. She doesn't lose. And I don't think she's going to lose. I think she's going to win. She will be in my lineup. But Lauren Murphy, not dangerous. Jessica Andrade, not dangerous at this weight class. A weight class below, sure. Jennifer Maia, she's 4-5 in the UFC. Caitlin Chikagian, she's not dangerous at all. Liz Carmouche, no. Jessica Ai, no. Joanna, yeah, she was dangerous, and that was 2018. My point is, Taila Santos is very, very dangerous. I don't know how live she is because there's no reason to assume anything other than Valentina Shevchenko will continue to be who she is. And then we got the main event of the evening. I am biased. I know Glover personally. I have known him personally for about 15 years. He's from Brazil, obviously, but he's spent the last 20 years in America, in Connecticut, where I'm from. I knew him when we were training in the wrestling gym together. So I know Glover really well, and I am biased. But even if I put the bias aside, let's take a look here. Jiri Prochazka, 2 wins in the UFC. Both great wins. Both knockout wins. Great. But, okay, Ozdemir, fine. Dominic Reyes, listen, I know he looked amazing against John Jones, but John Jones has a knack for making people look better than they are. He got smoked in his next 2 fights. Smoked. My point is, I think there's a little too much hype where Jiri Prochazka, Glover, uses those takedowns in his last couple of fights because his chin started to go. I'm going to be honest with you. This Gustafsson loss was a tough one. That was a tough loss to watch. That didn't look good. But then he came back, and he's put together all these wins. The only loss was a Corey Anderson, and that was a wrestling loss. And he's worked in his wrestling more. When Glover started his career, everybody was like, he's a BJJ black belt, but he is a striker, and he's knocking people out. And that's what he was doing. And then his chin started to go. He got a little bit older. And now all UFC and everybody else talks about is his grappling. And his grappling is phenomenal. Look what he's done in his last few fights with that grappling. But the reality is this Jan Blachowicz submission, that was set up by the striking. Glover cracked him, took his wits away, and then worked in the submission. So I think Glover wins this fight. Jiri Prochazka is dangerous. He's crazy. He doesn't care if he gets hit in the mouth. His chin holds up. But I think Glover, tried and true veteran, is going to work in the grappling and going to get it done. And I actually think Jiri Prochazka, yes, he's working with Henry Cejudo, and he's working on his takedown defense and working on his grappling. He might have spent too much time on that, not worrying about Glover striking, and Glover's going to have some success there. So I think Glover gets this done. He will be in my lineup. I've got bets on him. Again, I'm very biased, so factor that in however you want. But I like this card. I like this fight, and I'm looking forward to Saturday. Let me know your picks below. Join our free Discord. The link is in the description. And join our free DraftKings League. Compete against us. Compete against the rest of the community. Link is also in the description.